Okay, starting with general business, public comment. Anyone in the public would like to address the board? Seeing no one, I'd bring that back to item 2, approval of the minutes of the ABR for August 24th, 2009. Can I have a motion for that? By Keith, second by Dawn. Okay, going through the minutes, anything before item 1? No, item 1. Item 2.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Under item 1,
yep.
I believe there was something missing under landscaping, and that was to screen the temporary building from Milpas with an additional planter in front of it.
An additional plant, okay.
That could be number 4.
All right, you got that? Any others on item 1? Item 2.
And then on item 2 for landscaping?
Yep.
Number 1, some board members are okay with. We'd like to replace are okay with support of, what is it? Some board members are supportive of.
Support the?
Supportive of the proposed removal of the street tree. And that's tree, not trees, because there was only one.
Okay.
And number 2 is unnecessary. Because that's what number 3 says, and number 3 should be changed to say, study incorporating the planter into the architecture in order to accomplish planting shown on the elevations. Sorry.
Cascading plants.
In order to accomplish planting, the cascading planting as shown on the elevations.
Okay, very well. You have that? Item 3. Yes, Carol.
Number 1, I think, needs a little more explanation, and perhaps it could say there was not, as written, there was not sufficient information to make an accurate assessment or judgment of the proposed equipment and installation due to no scaled plans available for board review. Because I think they had all the information. It was just they showed us those little reduced plans that we couldn't read.
Okay. Okay. Anything else there? Do we want to make any changes to item 4, Keith? With the new city standard fixture. So what we should add here, which may make future light fixture replacement to the new city standard difficult. Okay. Okay, any others on item 3? Item 4. Oh, no item 4. So, okay, all those in favor of the motion as revised, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. All opposed? No opposition. Okay, so motion to open for consent. By Clay, second by Dawn. Okay, consent agenda.
So we'll start with last Monday, August 31st. Item A, 221 North Nopal Street, approved with conditions of review after final. Item B, 819 North South Zapata Street, final approval with conditions. Item C, 2101 Ridge Lane, postponed indefinitely at the applicant's request. Item D, 3222 State Street, referred to the Tuesday, September 8th full board meeting, today's meeting. Item E, 633 De La Vina Street, final approval as submitted. Items were reviewed by Clay Arell and Carol Gross.
Thank you. All those in favor of the agenda as stated, say aye. Aye. Objections? No? Okay. Motion passes. Dawn.
Second.
Okay. And then we have another consent agenda, right? So is that for the 24th? Oh. So another motion? Clay, second by Carol.
It's for today's agenda, Tuesday, September 8th. Item A, 560 Arroyo Avenue, continued 1 week. Item B, 630 Bath Street, continued indefinitely. Item C, 710 Olive Street, continued indefinitely. Item D, 825 Olive Street, indefinite continuance. And item E, 29 North Milpa Street, final approval with conditions. Items were reviewed by Clay Arell and Carol Gross.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So, closing that, we'll come to item D, announcements, requests by applicants for continuances and withdrawals. Any announcements?
I have a couple announcements. Member Paul Zink will be absent today. We have Dawn Sherry said she was going to step down from item 2. Item 4 on today's agenda, the 140 South Hope Avenue has been postponed at the applicant's request. Postponed indefinitely at the applicant's request. So we have only 3 items today.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Rock and roll.
Mr. Chair, I have an additional announcement. I'll be stepping down from item 3.
Item 3. Okay, Chris. All right. Okay. Any other announcements? No? Okay, so let's close that. Come back to subcommittee reports. Any subcommittee reports? Signs, lighting? No? Okay, that closes general business, and we can start with item number 1, 3222 State Street. Hi, how are you doing? Let's just turn that one on over there too. There you go.
They brought additional plans. This is what was submitted for consent. This is some photographs.
Okay, so you want to make the presentation then? Go ahead.
Let me just make a quick staff announcement.
Okay.
This was reviewed at consent last week, and it's for an as-built exterior alteration to the front facade and an as-built exterior color change. And then if Clay wants to make any additional comments from his review last week.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Everyone, I saw this on consent last week, and I felt that there was enough change from what was there to now that that I felt that the board should weigh in on it. My personal comments where I felt that while it's an improvement over what was there, the design cohesion is a little disjointed. So I felt that bringing it to the board might open some eyes to some other thoughts on what the applicant can do to resolve their current enforcement situation.
Okay, maybe you could start by just.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, let me just also make another brief announcement. The sign, as you see in the photograph, that has been altered from the original approved sign. The yellow at the border should be indeed gray, and that is an issue that the applicants will address today.
Okay, and is that the only enforcement issue, but there are others?
The enforcement issue is of the whole case. They did all of these changes without permits. So the sign application will be a separate enforcement case for the sign.
We did get the sign approved and permitted, but just the exterior color of the sign was approved for gray as opposed to yellow. So
I see. Okay, so would you like to go ahead and make your proposal?
well, basically we're proposing the wooden trellis that you see here on the front facade of the building. We've got elevations and site plans here that we were told we needed for this week's meeting. So if you want to have a look at those as well.
We also got some pictures of what it looked like before.
with what little money we had, we were trying to make it more beautiful and aesthetically pleasing for not only Santa Barbara, but the guests that we're trying to attract as well. And it seems that everyone in the community loves it, but I don't know how our ABR will feel about that. So,
Okay, so if I'm correct, what you've done is you've painted the building gray, or this brown, greenish gray, and they've painted the guardrails yellow. You put the new signage in to change from that, and it was approved with a different color, and now it's yellow, and you're coming before the board also. Oh, that sign is being reviewed by the sign committee.
Well, they're going to address what they wish to do with the sign, but it will be, if they wish to keep it yellow, that'll have to be a review after final that the sign committee will review at a later date.
Right. Okay.
and we're more than happy to paint it back gray if that will make things easier. We just thought that it would make it stand out a little bit more with the yellow. I mean, but I guess that's, that's the sign reviewer that I guess needs to decide that, so.
Okay. I think we'll open the board then for questions. This is not a...
And here's the site plans we were told we needed as well.
Okay. Seeing no one in the public as here to make a comment, I'll bring it back to the board for questions. Keith?
The only question I had was, have you considered any different
Go ahead.
have you considered any different design options for the signage besides kind of reusing the existing one?
Yes, sir, we did, and we got Freedom Signs to draw us up a couple different designs, and they were all going to be in the $10,000 to $12,000 range, and so this was the cheapest option we could go with to keep it in budget for what we had to use. I mean, we're not Fest Park or Doubletree here, so.
Mr. Chair, let me just bring it back to public comment. We have a letter from Ms. Paula Westbury in opposition.
Okay. Thanks very much. Close that portion again. Bring back to Gary. Enough?
It was a homeless motel basically before, and now we've definitely got a much different clientele, and I think that overall it's beneficial for the city, and it's just going to increase revenue for the city now that we're able to increase room rates. So.
Okay.
And we've also, on TripAdvisor, it was number 40 out of 60 motels.
And now it's at number 14. So,
in a month.
I understand there's some issues with the overall design. It's probably not as good as it could have been, but we really didn't have money to hire an architect, so this is the best we could do from just our, I guess what we.
All right.
Question.
Yep.
Mr. Chair.
Dawn.
Did you stain the redwood?
Yes, ma'am.
So
Yeah, it's
it's kind of
stained and
retain that
lacquered,
color?
right? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris? Clay? Carol?
All right, so I just want to clarify what you're calling on the plan the trellis. So it's going beyond the side of the house, of the building. So the setback was visible at one time, and now this structure has extended all the way to the property line.
That's correct, yeah. And
Okay.
behind that, there is this fence you're seeing here on the side is wrapping around and runs down behind the motel and then comes back and meets maybe a half a foot off the front facade of the building there. So
Right.
we
So-
extended it past the front so
Right,
that
so
you
let
wouldn't see that.
me ask
heavily.
staff a question. So Michelle, then technically that would be a zoning violation. I mean, they're
This is a commercial zone, so there's no
oh, so
setbacks.
height, okay, so that's
No
that.
setbacks or height restrictions.
Okay, and so on the plan, you're calling it a trellis. Your intention was, what was your design intention with this?
To modernize the front facade and make it pretty.
We'll just give it more street appeal and
Air conditioning, if they added air conditioning.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you.
I had a question. seeing you don't have any further streetscape photographs, but assuming from the photographs, what I see is a driveway entrance
Yes, sir.
on this side. So you have that driveway entrance here, and then on the other side there's a parking lot. Is that
Yeah, that's Radio Shack and Pool Supply Hardware
okay?
store.
So it's almost like your building stands between these two asphalted entryways, then between here and here.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, Gary, do you have any questions before we get into comments? Okay, going to go straight into comments. And Keith.
The photograph here. Drive by this just about every day, so kind of seen what's going on. I think it is an improvement of what's there, definitely. I think just design-wise, architecturally, you're trying to, in my mind, you're trying to play up kind of maybe the sort of mid-century feel of that gable end with the low-pitched roof and all that. And I guess my only comments would have been that, I think the trellis idea is nice. I would have just taken it straight across as a rectangle, so it just kind of emphasized it more as a plane and just kept the gable open. And so that's one comment. And then the yellow's just a little on the orange side for my taste. I think it would have been nicer to have gotten it away from the red tones just to lighten it up a little bit. And I guess the only other comment would be it's kind of unfortunate that the existing sign, the blade sign, just sort of is counter to kind of the planar architectural elements you have there. It would have been cool if you could have had, just some letters that went across there spelling the name out or something that would have been kind of maybe asymmetrically, balancing off this overhang. But it is an improvement, and I guess those are the only comments I had.
We actually considered doing something that was just right on the building, but then we realized people wouldn't be able to see it as they were driving up and down State Street.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. We let the board comment now.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Gary.
I'm really looking at it, and I don't really know if that it is an improvement because it's a bit foreign. Having so much trellis, having so much lattice work in front of the building is not cohesive with the existing architecture and the two-story balustrade, the horizontal, how it's horizontal and everything. And I don't really think that it. I think it's a bit too much in the front, and I suppose that if it was landscaped in front of it, if something was to hide a portion of it, I would be okay with it if there was something to grow on it. But as it stands as an architectural element in the very front of the building, I'm really not in favor of it.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. Dawn?
I actually think it's an improvement as well. I'm kind of along the same lines as Keith was saying. But I do agree with him that I think that it would have been nicer if it didn't go up to the gable and if it just came straight across. And it would have added a little three-dimensionality also to the front elevation. And it would have been nice if you could have picked up the same detailing on the baluster, the second-story baluster, to the deck instead of painting the metal railing yellow. I think that would have. I understand there's a cost issue, but that would have also been picked up that detail somewhere else on the property. But I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Clay?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
they've heard my comments before, but I'll just comment
For the board.
again. My favorite part of the project happens to be this picture because I think it actually does something. But I think what happens is we've lost. I agree with Keith's comment about having it be a plane or horizontal element, which would keep it more modern, and I agree with Dawn having if that element showed up further in the project, which is what I said to the applicant last week. Then it would sort of make sense. Right now, for me, there's just too many ideas that don't seem to have cohesion. I still think it's an improvement to the original building. The other thing, and I'm sure that my compadres to the right of me will address this, is that planter on the front used to be a small brick wall of some sort, and they've concreted it, just to keep it up. But I think something could be done nicely with that planter. Also, the exterior lighting was changed out too. The colors, I think for me the colors are fine. I think the yellow could soften up, but again, this is why I was having trouble with it on consent, because I couldn't come up with a solution that would wrap it all together. Okay, Keith. All right. Carol?
This actually caught my eye a while ago when I was driving down State Street, so I'm not surprised you're here. I'm very sympathetic that in good faith you made these changes, thinking that these were improvements. And either you're the manager or the owner of this property, but this is a prominent State Street facade. And it doesn't fit it doesn't fit State Street. I mean, I think if you just drove down this section, you would say to yourself, there's nothing else like this. And I'm not in favor of it for three reasons. One is I'm not in favor of taking that facade from the corner of the building all the way to the property line. If that trellis had recessed itself in at the setback, or not the setback, but the section where the building ends, where there's some character, there's some undulation instead of just this flat plane. That would have been an improvement. The second thing is I'm troubled by how the sign interacts with the horizontal boards. And the third thing is to change the landscaping on your property. That does require review. Everything, you're now on State Street. So, and I think that if you had just left the building in its original state and really did a very creative, powerful landscaping in front of it, that would have caught people's eyes, and the whole building would have been cohesive. If you had done more woodwork, like trellises, someplace where, like over the door fronts of the hotel rooms, then there would have been a consistency of wood used in a common way throughout the property. But this looks like a cover-up. It looks like a prefab screen that was bolted onto the side of a building that had no relationship to the character or the architecture of the rest of the building. I'm not in favor of this, and I don't know how, if you want to use, in my mind, if you still want to use portions of it, I'm not quite sure how that would be incorporated, but I can't be supportive of how this looks as it is.
Okay, Chris?
I agree again with many of the comments. I think the fact that it does go up the gable is of concern, and I think it's also a possibility that a vine could really help to soften at least the edges of this thing. And the landscaping, I think, could be a little more substantial. I know they're young plants, and they're also very spiky, and a little softer planting could help, as well as what Clay was saying about the wall itself. It looks pretty bright, concrete-y color. Is that right?
It's calico rock. The paint color you're asking, or
The wall itself.
this base wall that was. Oh yeah, it's concrete.
Molded over.
Yeah, I think that could certainly benefit from some kind of texture or a better material. That's all I've got.
Okay. I have to say that I think I think it is an improvement over the existing, but I think that some of your improvements that you made are a little bit disparate. You know, they just don't have the cohesion. And I agree with Dawn about, and I think Clay also said that if this element was used somewhere else too, if it was, say, in the back here, for instance, like a back fence that you saw, or in front of a trash container that was in the back there. I don't know what's in the back there, but that you could see it, it kind of gives that front and back kind of feel. So that's something that can work. I think that the yellow is a bit strong. You know, it is a strong yellow, but I think within the context of the green that you've used, the part that really throws me is the guardrails on top that are all yellow. And I think that that to me stands out as being the most egregious in that color. Also, you have some trim around the window at the back building that has like a little yellow trim to it. And I think that that's kind of odd. All the windows in front don't have them, and I wouldn't want to see them in yellow. And I think that in the back, when you do that, I think it's just odd. It just does not look correct in the back there. So those were two things that I would definitely want to see changed: is the guardrail in the back to a different color, the trim around that window a different color. I see the point that the others are making about the horizontality of this, and if the direction were that we took off that triangular portion up there, I would be fine with that. I think that the sign committee should go back and look at the yellow. It's a very strong yellow. I think if you can find something that could blend the curb in here so that it just takes away from that bright new finished look. And what I'm trying to do here is find ways for which you can move forward without having to redo everything, but bring it into an acceptable level without, you know, undoing what you've done. Because I think the modernization of the horizontals, this horizontal look, which is a more modern look, would go along with a more modern planting scheme that you have in front. You know, you have a nice agave there, and then you have a smaller one and a little one, and that's kind of odd. And if you had treated the whole thing across and done it sort of an even way, and had maybe the same size plants going coming down, and then you had a secondary one maybe to the front. I don't know. I'd let you and your designer work with that. But it looks like it's home planted as opposed to really thought out. And so if it were all complete, it was all the same sizes, the landscaping would read with the modern horizontal banding. And I think that would have a stronger front. So I like the signage that you have here with the numbers, but I find that when you look at it from any distance, you can't read the sign very well at all. You almost have to look very closely at where that number is. So that's something else. And if that's what you'd like to have, you know, it's fine. I'm not saying that your numbers should pop out right away or something like that. I just think that the numbers get lost, even though they're nicely and artistically done. Okay, having said that, I mean, my preference would be here is to try and have you take what you have and make minor alterations that could bring it into an acceptable level. That would be the approach I would like to see happen. And at that point, I'd open it to a motion from anyone on the board that would like to take a stab at it. Yeah, Carol?
So what I heard, 4 people. So the majority of the board is not in favor of this as submitted, and the motion is to have an indefinite continuance, which means more than a week. And so when you're ready, you call, and then you get on the agenda. An indefinite continuance to the full board to propose a more acceptable facade based on all the comments that you heard.
I mean, would you guys just prefer us to take it down? I mean, I just would hate to have to keep coming back and wasting everyone's time. And I mean,
Let's
it's like,
let's see where the motion goes, and I'll try to give you some guidance before
yeah,
you
it
leave
just
here.
seems-
You'll know what we
it
have
just
to do.
seems like, I mean, we're opening up the
Yeah.
board to make like hundreds of changes when we really don't have the money to do so. So, I mean, if we could take it down and that would make everybody's life easier, then we'll be more than happy.
Let's go
to do
through the
so.
motion, and before you leave, we'll give you guidance as to what
Okay.
we think you should
That'd be
do.
great.
Yeah.
All right.
So do we have a second on Carol's motion? Okay. Second one by Chris.
I'm wondering if 2 weeks continuance is out of the question, or if there's any reason why.
I just felt that they might have needed more than 2 weeks, but if
I
you.
mean, this is just what we're proposing, and like I said, I don't want to waste anyone's time or ours. I just was
Hold on,
hoping
we're-
for.
Okay.
Hold on.
Yeah. Just wait till let us finish the motion because we don't know where this is going yet.
Okay, that's fine.
So we have a first and a
That's fine.
second.
A second.
We have a first and a second.
Mr. Chair, we would recommend a specific continuance on an enforcement case. So
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
if they need 2 or 4 weeks.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there.
Under discussion.
Under discussion, I don't think the motion is specific enough because it is an enforcement case. I think it needs to be specific, and I heard 4 of the 7 of us say that the wood trellis was an improvement over the existing design. So I'm not sure where you're getting the majority
Oh,
of us.
then there was just 3 that said that. So it was Gary, Clay, myself, and Chris said that this is not an improvement to the facade.
Clay didn't think it was an improvement.
Oh, you did say it was an improvement.
Yeah, the majority
Okay,
of the
that's-
board, I think, feels that it is an improvement, but it just isn't quite there yet. So I think that if you're the maker of the motion, and that you wanted to leave it vague like that, then the specific language that needs to be added is in keeping, or should be, in my opinion, that in working with what the applicant has already done, because I feel that the majority of the board feels that it could be worked on, that we should just be more specific with that regard.
Right.
Such as return with a way of incorporating the proposed trellis detailing somewhere else on the property and eliminating the trellis in the portion of the gabled roof, and making further refinements to the landscaping that would complement the architecture. Those would be the kind of comment that I would be able to support in a motion.
Under discussion, how do the makers and seconder feel about that insertion?
Okay, so if we're going to list them, then I think we should add choose a more earth color for the concrete planter wall. And how does the board feel about recessing the part that does not, that meets the edge of the building, recess that back a little bit so we don't have a straight facade that is extending beyond the building? Does anybody think that is?
Or would you prefer to see it stop at the edge of the building?
Yeah, I personally don't like this plant-on, kind of like pre-made screen that looks like it's bolted on that has no relationship to the architecture. So that's what my motion was directing toward. Does anybody just nod or, just give me some reaction if anybody agrees with that or not? It doesn't have to be a discussion. Does anybody agree?
Well, I already stated that I just don't agree with I don't think it's compatible with the architecture. So I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, I actually don't either. Why don't we do this? Let's have my motion fail because I would not be able to vote in favor of reworking what's there. So let's just have my motion fail, and then another motion could be created.
You don't have to vote in favor of
You
your
don't have to say
motion.
fair. You could withdraw your motion.
Okay, then I'd like to. I think it's just better, simple, that if I withdraw the motion.
Okay. So we have someone else who would like to propose a motion then?
I'll propose a motion as I stated in my discussion item, Kathy, and that was to return with a solution that, I don't know if you got any of that, those 2 items about picking up that wood detail somewhere else on the property, as well as removing the portion within the gable
Within a gable.
roof. And I'm okay with the comment that, I mean, I'd like to include in my motion a comment. What was, let me see that photo of the planter. Let me look at that. And Carol, your comment was that it needed to be a darker color, that curb.
Well, that was actually Chris's
Yeah, I just think that it needed more of a texture or a different color. Something a little more in the earth tone.
Maybe in a gray that matched the
Yeah,
building.
maybe.
Gray that matched the building might be enough.
Yeah, that the planter curb to be painted the same color as the exterior plaster.
Could I ask a question?
And
This-
Let's just wait till
Okay.
hold on a second.
we have work to do.
And
so.
and I think I'm not sure how to handle the landscaping issue. It's really hard to see the plants. Or here's a better photo. I think that it's going to be a really long time before some of these plants get, a few years before some of these. I would
Recommend
like
something?
I would like to
We'll
be one of
finish
the
them.
landscape architects to make a statement about that.
All right, perhaps, I'm still going to vote negative, but perhaps it could say, provide an embellished landscape plan.
Yeah, that's fine, Kathy. That would.
Under discussion with the maker entity. Well, do I have a second? Second by Keith. So we have a motion and table under discussion with the maker and the seconder entity in them having to paint the guardrails in the back a different color that would more blend in with the building, and the yellow trim around the windows at the back, the rear of the building.
Yeah, the yellow doesn't really work with those.
It just looks super dull with all that gray. Super dull.
Yeah.
Maybe you might find another color.
Yeah,
Right
I mean,
up
I will
to
gladly paint it if that'll. But
Yeah.
The comment would be to return with a
Color proposal.
different proposal for the color of the guardrail on the two-story element to the rear of the property.
Okay.
Chair, under discussion.
Keith. Clay.
It's okay. Can I have the motion read back? Because I'm not
Could we have the motion read
not
back?
exactly
Just-
clear on where we are in the motion.
This would be an indefinite continuance back to full board. Oh, time specific. Specific. 2 weeks or 4 weeks would you like to have?
2 weeks would be great.
2 weeks.
Well, do we need to propose the new things first?
In the 2
before-
weeks, you would,
Okay.
when you come back, you would propose these changes that we're suggesting.
But can we leave today on guide? I mean, I guess like a list of what exactly, because I'm a bit confused.
That's
Paint
what
the
we're
railing.
giving,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
what we-
So
Kathy's
she's-
been writing it down.
So she's,
No,
we're going to have the motion read back.
Probably.
Write it down.
Yeah.
Let's see what they.
So down.
Do you guys, anyone have a? Okay.
Okay. A majority of the board feels that the proposed element is an improvement to the existing building. Applicant to find a more acceptable location, and the acceptable location was for the what element?
The wood
For
screen.
The wood screen. Wood
For-
screen.
An additional.
use of the wood screen.
Additional use
theme.
of the wood screen.
Is there anywhere that you guys would specifically like to see that?
The back guardrail is a good start.
Remove the guardrail and do a wood trellis, brill, or
I don't know. Just you asked for a suggestion.
right?
That was the one I
'Cause
suggested
I just want to
during the
make
meeting.
sure that we can try to get it approved when we come back.
That would
So-
be a
That
good
would be a
place
good
to
thing.
start.
It should be visible from the street as is this front.
Okay.
A more earth tone, lighter tone for the element for that
Concrete
element.
curb at the planter.
Right.
For the concrete curb at the planter here.
Painted. Did you
Yeah,
suggest
planter curve to be
color?
painted in more acceptable color is
Building
what I
color.
have. Okay. Return with a different proposal for the guardrails at the rear, and at the rear of the property.
The color.
Proposed.
And then the landscaping. And then the other issue was to remove the portion of the screen that was within the gable roof. That was the other one, Clay.
Further comment, Clay?
Miss-
Under discussion. Part of one of the things that I've seen on this project that could be an improvement, but it's definitely a budgetary concern, would be if they want to go in a more modern aesthetic, one possible solution would be to change out the doors, take the raised panel off, and you could do any number of things in that respect, and also use a more modern, like the address number for the door numbers or suite numbers, to try to bring cohesiveness. I think that's my biggest issue with this project, is that there's a lack of cohesiveness. So one thing would be the wood trellis at the back, somehow in the two-story element, bringing that in. Another thing would be the numbers or changing out the doors to a more modern style of door. The only other issue for me that I've been having a hard time with that hasn't been talked about is how the trellis or this lattice work actually stops. And it just kind of, at the corner at each side, though, it just stops. And I'm more concerned about it on the pedestrian entry side, is that it's just, it's just the end of the board there. And I think it adds to the sort of disjointedness of what's going on there on the project. So for me, I would suggest, I'm going to suggest it, maybe the applicant can come back with something when they come back, is an alternative to the doors, changing out the doors to a different style, and resolving the corner condition where the trellis or the lattice ends, whatever we're calling it.
So maker and seconder to that comment.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
there's two things I want to make very clear to the applicant, is that the level of changes that are being contemplated would most likely require additional plan drawings. And one of the concessions that we gave this applicant was to present the as-built improvements without a actual elevation. So what we wanted to do is to make sure if we had a concept that could be supported, rather than expend a lot of money to depict something that could not be permitted by this board. So as we move forward, I want to caution the applicant that there would be an expectation to provide an elevation of the work that you're proposing. That might take an architect or somebody to draft that up, as well as it appears some landscaping information that might need a landscape architect. So, and I just want to also caution the board that there's a preferred level of alteration that may be here, but that's not before you. You have to sort of approve or comment on what's before you, and not suggest a lot of other changes that aren't before you. That's the scope of this work. These folks are not coming with the full renovation of the site. So I want to make sure that's understood.
Thanks, Jaime.
As the maker of the motion, I think that the applicant could note what you were telling them as advice, but I prefer not to put the door in the motion. And as far as the detailing at the end of that wall, again, I think the applicant should note that there seems to be some consensus that there could be an approvable project here, but to look at how that's terminating and attention to detail before you come back. I think that probably what's bothering Clay is that trellis just stops right at the plaster. It doesn't come beyond. It doesn't step in. there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of thought put into how it's detailed. So the quality of the detailing is kind of an implied piece of advice for you to.
So right now it's not an emotion, but we're voicing it for your thoughts for when you come back. You understand about that portion of it?
Yeah, I do. But I'm just not sure what we should do about how it ends.
Yeah,
I guess
that's where you're going to
Have to-
maybe
have to hire a designer.
have to think about it and get some help.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a first and a second. Any more under discussion? No? Okay, all those in favor of the motion as read, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? 2 opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
I've opposed this motion. I opposed it because this is the front of a building on State Street. The style of the trellis is not consistent with the architecture nor of any other building on State Street. And I do want to just heads up, when you come back with your new landscape plan, cactus that could poke out into the adjacent sidewalk is not acceptable.
Okay, if you can always check with the secretary to get a run of the minutes or look at the video again. And then if you have any questions, then you can call us. Michelle has... Michelle, you have you could give them my number if they have questions about things on emotion, just so they understand what they need to get done, and I could tell them. Is that okay? Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, item number 2. Citywide. Oh, pass that to Michelle.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
after the presentation of the applicant, before your consideration of the item, staff has some comments with respect to
Okay.
this
Thanks, Simon.
application's review.
Okay, if you can state your name and make a presentation. Thanks. Thanks.
Sharon James with,
There you go.
Sharon James with NextG Networks. We're here to do, we were continued the last time. We came back to present some additional information. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we have up on the wall here, and I also have hard copies of that presentation for each of you. You want to... Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Oh, no, I have one full size. Yeah, I thought you were going to use it as a visual here. But we have a soft copy as well on the CD that we can check. Oh, okay, sorry, we misunderstood that. Okay. Just to start, just an overview, we've met before, but we didn't get to talk to you much about what type of company we are. NextG is, we're not a wireless.
Next slide.
Oh, who's
Start
got
the slideshow.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry. Thanks. Maybe I can get over here.
Go ahead and launch the slideshow.
Yeah.
No, go ahead and launch the slideshow.
Yeah. There we go. Sorry. Okay. All right. So our NextG networks, fiber-based DAS networks, is what we build. From a regulatory perspective, we're not a wireless service provider. We're a fiber transport service using RF over fiber technology. 90% of our network is fiber optic cable and multiplexers. We operate under the rights granted under the Telecommunications Act, Section 253 and 332, and also California State Statutes, Section 7901. NextG is a state-regulated public utility, what's called a CLEC, operating under CPCN U6745 from the Public Utilities Commission. We're an active member of the Southern California Joint Pole Association, and as a member, we have vested interest in existing utility poles in the region and the right to attach our equipment to them. Under PU Code 7901, NextG has a statewide franchise that allows us to make installations on utility poles. The city's ordinance exempts attachments from the CUP, processes microcells when proposed on utility poles, and also in the city's ordinance 28.94030 provides that the board and the commission may take action regarding the location of the antennas on the site, color and size of the proposed antennas, so as to minimize any adverse visual impacts. We're just pulling that out of your ordinance. The ABR is not authorized by the city's ordinance to comment on the equipment, fiber, or the other characteristics of the deployment. It's our interpretation of the way the code reads.
Having said that, though, we're
Yeah.
here to talk through all of the equipment, and we have lots of maps available to show you where we're proposing, and so that's not something we expect to make an issue of today.
Right. And also, given that we've had some preliminary meetings prior to this, we would discuss more what we ask the outcome of today's meeting to be. Actions taken since the last meeting. In your comments, you asked us to do a number of things, and we followed up. Per your suggestion, we installed mock-ups of the current designs at the following locations: one on State Street, two on Laguna. We removed the 5 controversial locations from the application: the 4 city streetlights and the 1 new pole. And
Let me just
Yeah.
step in on there. One of the things that we did when we made our modifications consistent with your request was to try to focus on issues that are what we thought, based on what we understood for feedback, to be the most important issues of the board. One of the most important issues of the board was the concerns associated with the street lights and that new pole. But that only consists of 5 of our proposed installations. We're not going to completely. We're going to come back to you at some point in the future for those other installations, but we want to allow that to develop over time and to give those the consideration that they're obviously going to require, based on the feedback that we have. We can operate this network, and this is an important notation, I think, for the record. This network can operate independently with the 50 proposed utility pole installations that we're coming out with you now today. So there's no concern that, at least from our side, that we're going to come back at you at some point in the future and say, hey, you approved these other 50. Now, we believe we have a vested right to get these other 5. That's by no means the intent here with this particular application. They're independent applications from our perspective right now.
Right. And I'm just kind of continuing to do a little overview of what we've done since our last meeting, and then we can discuss in detail some of the drawings, the pictures that we have to show you, et cetera. Anyway, we're providing pictures of alternative designs that minimize the impact by replacing the equipment with the equipment shroud with a smaller piece of equipment. That mock-up at State Street was modified to show the minimized design. And we're providing pictures of alternative designs that involve moving equipment from the utility pole to a cabinet on the ground. We've provided plans of each of the 3 typical installations. That's what you're looking at now. They all basically are the same with the exception of the antenna mounting. So those represent 3 different antenna mountings. Detailed dimensions of the equipment, which you asked for, are included in these drawings, and we've also provided a large map of the city showing the proposed node locations, which we can put on your overhead projector. And additionally, we have that city map broken into quadrants so that we can zero in on that. We have that in soft copy and hard copy if you want to take a look at it. So those are the actions we took as a result of the comments that you made in the last meeting, asking us to take some steps to minimize impact. Okay. All right. Let's see. You should have had on that CD. There should have been a number of other. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at the mock-up pictures. Hopefully some of you got a chance to look at the mock-ups that we did in the community. And Heidi, you have the mock-up pictures?
Could we just get a sense? Were we all able to get an advance notice of the mock-ups and then drive by them? Okay.
Heidi, does that have the ion?
The last two.
Okay.
Each package
No,
is the same.
each package is the same, yeah.
So just pass it
Yeah.
back.
So we have a couple extra probably. Okay. These are the actual pictures of the actual mock-ups. The let's see, the first one you have is the arm mount. You can see this is the equipment cabinet, or what we call the shroud. It has internal to it the ion, which is the basic radio equipment, if you will. There's the antenna on the arm. The design of these poles is overseen by General Order 95 from the California Public Utilities Commission. You have to leave a certain amount of climb space. You have to be a certain distance away from other utilities on the pole. You have to mount the equipment a certain height above the ground. And we're compliant with all of that in this design. This shroud allows you to install 2 ions so that you could install a future carrier at some point. I think I told you the last time, or we may have shared with you, that the fiber that gets installed can carry as many as 5 carriers, so that there's a lot of capacity in this network if another carrier comes along and wants to cover holes or whatever in those neighborhoods for coverage. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think you should just minimize that. We can refer back
Oh,
to it.
okay. Okay. That's out of order, isn't it? Let me look at the other one first. Okay. Strand mount. The strand mount's the next picture in your package. Let's see. Okay, so that's a picture of a strand-mounted antenna. That antenna is right here. What?
Down
That's down there.
there.
Oh, it's down here, yeah. I knew it was right there at the tree line. So small antenna mounted on the fiber itself. There's the shroud that we were discussing earlier on the pole. And then the pole top. Here's the antenna at the top. And then the equipment mounted on the pole. I think this is the one that we also went out and modified so that you could see the impact of us taking the shroud off and installing just a single ion. As I was saying earlier, the ion, 2 of those will fit in the shroud. In this case, we changed out the mock-up so that we just installed 1 ion on the pole. And there it is right there.
Now, that equipment itself, if I could just jump in, is not painted to match right now, but we can, we'd be fine with a condition of approval of making that equipment painted to match the pole.
The ion itself is about half the size of and width of the shroud. So what we talked about before was the shroud. This reduces that by about half. The antenna stays the same. The equipment is reduced. There's another shot of it. Heidi, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
I just want to mention in your packets the best comparison for the shroud versus the ion by itself would be the first and the last pictures in the packet. That'll give you the same view of the 2 different types of mounting equipment.
Face on view of the equipment on the pole. I'm sorry, what?
What we're proposing, just to be clear, what we're proposing, we're actually proposing the shroud. But there were a number of requests from the board to talk about how we could minimize the size of the equipment. We would prefer to install the shroud, but we can install. That's the shroud, yeah. Within that shroud will fit 2 of those boxes, and it's about half the size. And so we would propose, if this is something that the board, feels would lead to an approval, we would propose conditioning the approval on installing just the ion without the shroud.
And again, the purpose of the shroud is the second carrier comes into town next to you now, put that second carrier on this existing shroud rather than saying we need another node or we need another 50 nodes, guys. And a year from now, this allows the capability for another carrier to jump right in this unit and use the same site for additional nodes.
And that's an ion or a shroud?
That's an ion.
Which the ion is the equipment that goes into the shroud. This brown box you're looking at here is the shroud. It houses 2 ions. That's why it's bigger.
So what's all the equipment below this ion?
The equipment below the ion is...
Look at that picture.
Yeah, the equipment below the ion here is the connecting box, which is inside the shroud as well. And then it's going to be the same disconnect and WTR as well.
So these boxes are still required
Yes.
on this board?
Yes.
Although they're just not covered when they're not in the shroud.
Was there going to be a meter attached to these? Is there still an electric meter that goes to each one of these units?
It's a WTR. It's not an actual meter, but it's an NC WTR.
Are you finished with the proposal?
Okay, sorry.
Well, that shows you what we did in terms of the mock-ups, and we've presented a citywide map here, as I said, that shows where we are proposing to install on utility poles. The red indicates the HLC, and the green is outside of the HLC. Yellow is the Caltrans, which we already have approval from Caltrans. So that gives you a picture. If you want to zoom in on the city map, if you have questions about specific neighborhoods, we have that in soft copy that we can zoom in and show you. And as I said, we have a hard copy as well.
Okay.
So-
Is that a proposal?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Jaime, can I ask a question before I open it up to public comment here?
I have some comments. You want to ask your question first, or do you want
Yeah,
to hear from me?
maybe you are probably going to answer something that I'm going to ask here. But
Okay.
and under this document that they presented here, specifically the line that says, the ABR is not authorized by the city's ordinance to comment on the equipment, the fiber, or other characteristics of the deployment. So my question to you is, why are they here?
Let me just jump in right before Jaime, because I intended to caveat that statement. We are here to talk to you about the equipment. We have a discussion about the scope of that review, but we're obviously making proposals based on the equipment.
But we're
And
not
so,
authorized to comment on it.
Well, I think Jaime is going to disagree with that statement, and we're fine with that for now. We're fine to talk about the equipment.
Okay.
I'll let Jaime go from
Okay,
there.
let's talk about the city's purview. There are two types of improvements that are occurring here. One, as a public utility, which we do not have any disagreement that they do qualify as a public utility, they have the right to place their equipment on these power poles within the city. They have these right-of-way agreements, power agreements to do so. In establishing this network, in order to connect these conduits and connections, they have to come through Public Works to use the right-of-way. In that franchise agreement, that does give the city authority to have a review of those improvements to determine if they meet the city's standards. To that degree, it's our position that our review process allows the ABR to comment on those improvements in their entirety. However, the focus has been on the improvements that are in the right-of-way but happen to be a city structure, like a light fixture, which you've seen, or a new pole structure that gets put in the right-of-way. So that our initial focus was to have you comment on those, with the understanding that the typical installation throughout the city would also have these microcells be attachments, as well as these cabinetry boxes attachments. So if they were acceptable in the 5 locations that were under your purview, they would also potentially be acceptable throughout the city, because they are in fact placing them wherever they have a microcell. So to the degree that we disagree is that if you indicate to us that these microcells are an aesthetic problem, they haven't been minimized to the degree acceptable, then that would be a concern for the city to also allow them throughout the city. So what we're asking you to do today is to look at these microcell locations and determine if, as our ordinance indicates, have they been minimized to the degree that, I'll read you the actual section. Excuse me. The section says that the board may take action regarding the location of the antennas on the site, color, size of the proposed antennas so as to minimize any adverse visual impacts. And when we look at what we have your purview under, it includes the cabinetry equipment as with a companion with that microcell. So I don't think this board is saying that the microcell itself is much of a visual impact. So based on my understanding of your minutes, you are more concerned about all this other cabinetry in ions that require a shroud, and possibly the location and those visual impacts to that. And that's what I was hoping this board would focus in on, exactly how have we guided this applicant to minimize those visual impacts.
Yeah. Thanks, Jaime. And microcell, you're talking, the microcell is the little pole on top versus the cabinetry and the ion that falls below. Those are the two items.
An entire installation that I believe that you were having more struggles with the cabinetry and the shroud issue.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for public comment. Anyone in the public would like to comment on this? Seeing no one, I'll close that portion and bring it back. We have any letters? I'll read Paul's letter. Yes, so I'd like to read this letter that we have from Paul Zink, who is also a board member but is not able to attend today. I have seen the mock-up display and I thank the applicant in providing them for our review. I have taken several photos of each mock-up which are included for your review. Please note they require 4-inch separation. The required 4-inch separation, the equipment boxes from the pole, and how it will be seen from the sides. Also notice how the equipment boxes breaks up the vertical lines of the pole and creates a bump that further draws attention. I believe this application is not in the direction we want our city to go. This system will add additional visual clutter to our sight lines. We have spent a great deal of effort in our city to creatively conceal or minimize the visual impact of cell phone equipment and antennas. Even though the whip antenna of the NextG system is small in nature, the pole-mounted equipment boxes are unacceptable to our city design standards. This board would not be able to give this application the provides no adverse visual impacts that we strive to provide with a typical cell site application. I recommend to the board that we deny this application on the grounds that the additional utility service that is being proposed by NextG on the existing utility pole system in the city will result in unmitigable visual damage to our community. We are the Architectural Review Board, and we have a responsibility to protect and enhance the architectural character of Santa Barbara. Paul Singh. So you have a copy of that to put on the record, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I also wanted to comment on, this board had requested your initial comments be forwarded to the Historic Landmarks Commission, and they were in fact given to them last week. And the commission also had some issues with respect to this equipment. They concluded ultimately to find them unacceptable. They actually moved to deny them in the locations within El Pueblo Viejo district. And they indicated that the equipment did not relate to the historic character of El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District. Staff alerted them that it was premature to deny. This typical review process involves dealing with these as a proposal to minimize these visual impacts. If, in fact, you cannot conclude that these visual impacts have been minimized, then it would not qualify as an exemption to a conditional use permit, and then this application would be forwarded to the Planning Commission. So that's just the implication. I know some of you may want to deny, but we're going to recommend that you work with the applicant just like you do any other carrier to minimize these visual impacts, if at all possible, with whatever alternatives you can come up with.
Okay, thanks, Jaime. So I'm going to bring it back to the board for questions, closing public comment. Keith?
Looking at this photograph here, is this conduit part of the system that's coming up from the?
Yes.
Okay, so that is part of your system. All right. And so, as I understand things correctly, all the equipment that was proposed before on top of light fixtures, that's no longer being proposed?
That's correct. Just to be absolutely clear, it's entirely narrowed down to existing brown utility poles.
Okay, so likewise, the Q-tip pole is out
the Q-tip's
window.
out. Yep.
Okay, and that the ion is interchangeable with the shroud. The difference being the shroud allows for future additions of equipment.
And the shroud covers some of the ancillary equipment, like the WTR and some of the other things that are affiliated with it. Absolutely.
Those are the only questions I have.
Thanks, Keith. Gary?
I was looking through the plans, and I was looking for the shroud, the dimensions of the shroud, and I didn't see it in the documents here. You had the ion unit, but you did not have the dimensions of the shroud, and also the WTR that you were mentioning. Some of the things that I was looking at on here, I had questions about the size. You have a piece of 2-inch Schedule 80 that's running up alongside the pole, and it's holding a number 6 wire and one fiber optic line, and I suppose an option for another fiber optic line. And
it's actually a half-inch piece of coax.
Well, here you have a piece of 3/4 inch, but on going up to the pole with the number 6, you have a piece of 2-inch conduit, and that's how it is on the mock-up as well.
2-inch conduit will house the half-inch coax, a number 6 ground wire, and a fiber optic cable.
So it's a half-inch coax on it, and the fiber optic
cable and a number 6 ground wire.
And a number 6 ground wire. And then and in addition to that, I saw that you had a piece of 1-inch watertight and coming up to the unit as well. So you have a 1-inch and a 2-inch coming up.
The 1-inch goes from the actual WTR up to the power source, which is going to be Edison supplying power at the top of the pole.
You need a microphone in front of you.
Edison will drop. We'll bring our wires up, and Edison will tie those into their secondary source. That's why there's 2 risers on the pole.
Okay.
And this is spec'd out per their specs and the size of riser they want, the size of wires they want. Edison will service.
And like you said, that they're not, Edison's not going to throw in an additional meter on each one of these units. All right, those are the questions I had.
Thanks. Clay? Carol?
So my question is, the plastic conduit that's running up the post, is there any way that that could be somehow incorporated, like into the post, meaning like drilled the profile of it so it's set in, so it's not sticking out?
The issue of the answer is no, but I want to give you an explanation as to why. Remember I described last time we were here that there's two ways of looking at a utility pole. From the top down, where you have different quadrants, and then vertically as you go up the pole, there's lots of different areas that are reserved for different types of providers. And for anything that sort of goes up a pole and crossovers over those different sections, there's very specific rules promulgated by the California Public Utilities Commission, known as GO95, and there's lots of, I could let Chris add some additional things, but that would actually compromise the integrity of the pole itself as well.
Okay, so my second question is, so it looks like on each pole we have 2 plastic conduits that's going up the poles, 2 per pole.
Right, and they're about 9 feet up. But you can flip to page 2, there's an existing one.
Okay, so what are you proposing as far as the color of those? Are you I mean, that's a PVC. Are you proposing to paint that the color of the pole, or do you want to leave it white for a reason?
I guess that could be open.
Absolutely, we'd be happy. We installed these. Perhaps we should have painted them first, but we presume that the board may want to impose that condition, and absolutely we can paint any of this, anything from the antenna down to the conduit or the equipment, and we painted to match.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I'm still a little unclear, Jaime. So the ABR's duty today is to not give, like, a denial is not acceptable. Like we would have to give just comments at this point and not make a motion.
You could still reject the solution they proposed, but we would want you to comment as to why you found it unacceptable. It's the same thing. You say what your concern is aesthetically on the installation. And the reason we think it's premature is because we think that the land use decision is at the Planning Commission if you find that there are some visual impacts that have not been minimized. In other words, it gets kicked up to the Planning Commission with whatever comments you have on the proposal.
Mm-hmm. And you may not be able to answer this, but in their presentation, both today and the previous one, lots of comments saying, when more carriers come, we're just one of many. Is the city's position to, create this revenue by renting out these poles to more and more possible carriers?
No, I think what the city's planning perspective on this is we believe that this type of utility will help other carriers be able to utilize these microcells by not requiring a actual pole and a panel type of antenna. You've had that struggle with these locations where there's no building in the close proximity, and all they have is a pole or a fake light standard. And this infrastructure could assist in that, and thereby using the facility for transmission of their service without having to put a U-pole structure in. So we think this is a benefit. We don't anticipate a lot more of these type of companies coming in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
Chris?
I just wanted to clarify a little bit about the single ion versus the shroud with 2 ions. What you recommended the 2 ion shroud. Why is that? What's the difference? Do you need the 2?
The assumption, we're a carrier's carrier, and we can accommodate multiple carriers, and our hope in proposing the shroud was to have an enclosure that accomplishes a couple things. One, it covers up some of the other ancillary equipment that we're installing. It also covers up the ion. It's easier to paint. If NextG comes back with another carrier, it could then install it within that shroud. There would be no visual impact, no change to the.
So it's basically one ion per customer.
That's essentially the case.
Okay.
And if the if the board recommends that we reduce back to the single ion,
right.
And if there's another customer in the future, then NextG would need to come back and seek that approval.
So if we start with the shroud, we can have 2 customers, and if you need more, then we're talking about adding more.
It would be new. It would be more polls. We'd have to come back to you in any case.
Okay.
For that.
Another question is, how long is this technology good for? I mean, how long are these proposed to last?
Well, fair question. The technology itself, there's if I could ask an answer a somewhat related question, is how long. Well, a lot of people wonder whether or not this is going to be replaced ultimately by satellite or some other type of technology, and the answer is no, because there's a distance between your phone itself and the satellite that creates a certain amount of latency because it takes time for that signal to go, and because of that latency, it's just not something that can be overcome with because it's a physics problem. It's not a technology problem. It's not something to be overcome. So the pundits all believe that terrestrial. In other words, antennas mounted on structures on the ground is the future.
Okay.
And within that type of design, this is, in many ways, the future because it's future-proof in the sense that it's built connected with fiber optic cables, and these aren't copper wires connecting them, so the capacity is potentially infinite in the type of bandwidth that they can cover. The installations the equipment itself is what NextG calls protocol neutral, agnostic. In other words, it doesn't really matter what happens with the technology. These boxes are not unlike the spigot on the end of a hose. They just, retransmit whatever comes through the hose. So the technology upgrades based on this system happen elsewhere. They happen at a base station, that's a long ways away, and there's very little upgrade at all or any change out that needs to happen here to accommodate that growth.
Okay, and then I guess my last question is. My cell coverage seems fine in the city. So, I mean, why do we need this overall? I mean, what's the...
Well, there's the, this particular network is going to be built for a customer of NextG's called Metro PCS. I don't know if you have Metro PCS coverage.
I don't know either.
They're a relatively new entrant to the market, and so... they don't have the coverage that your cell phone has. And this is more of a legal issue, but the rights are under state law are vested such that NextG has a statewide franchise to make its attachments to utility infrastructure, and any carrier, whether it's Metro PCS and most of the other carriers do have some coverage here, are entitled to provide coverage in that area, and they've chosen to do it through this public utility.
I see.
And so
this won't eliminate the need for these other cell towers that are already in place.
It would reduce the need let's just walk down a hypothetical. I mean, let's assume NextG weren't here. Then there would need to be for Metro PCS a number of new cellular installations, full site installations that would need to be proposed.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
I need to ask a follow-up question. So is this another cell company like our Verizon? It's just like another choice.
NextG is not that company. NextG is a carrier's carrier for the wireless industry. But from a user's perspective, yes, this is another choice. It's another company that has an SEC license and is mandated to provide coverage in the area.
Okay, thanks. Gary, one question.
Yes, I have one question, and I was wondering, have you explored or have you looked into underground bolting at each pole rather than attaching onto the pole?
The only time we've only made one vault installation because of the size of the equipment. It's very small. This ion really is the smallest piece of equipment on the market for this. It's not a base station. It doesn't have to process the signals. It's really just agnostic, pushing it through. And so in order to put in a vault, the cells need to be of a certain size and width. you need to put something in that would be much larger to accommodate it. And because of NextG's right as an owner of these poles, and because of the state statute that allows it to install on poles, we will install on poles.
I understand you're right, yeah.
And that's our, and so that's what our proposal is, and we're not proposing vaulting.
Okay, thanks. I don't have any questions. I think all the questions I had were asked by the other members already. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Just to let you, the question was asked on the shroud dimensions. We had a previous plan that submitted. It had it at 14-inch wide by about 47-inch tall, with projections out to about 11-inch away from the pole, and with the potential for another 18-inch square electrical low-voltage box below some of those facilities. At least that's what the details show.
Great. It looks like that's what's pretty well depicted in their mock-up.
So I just wanted to
So I could see that in the mock-up.
And there is one, just getting back to the question of vaulting, one thing that we have done in some cases, this is very unusual for a city to request this, but we're happy to do it, is installing the equipment on the ground itself. In a cabinet furniture. And we have some pictures of that we can show. We'll have some pictures. It needs to be big enough in order for there's minimum sizes that are required for based on the electrical unions in order to be able to go in and do the work.
Okay,
There's a picture right here.
Can I show you real quick? These are in other markets. This is a ground-mounted piece of ground-mounted furniture, as we call it. It has a backup generator in it. It's the Arizona market.
Yeah, it's a cable TV power supply.
And that would be at every pole.
Right.
Right, and this is the same thing, a little different scenario.
So typically, the reason why we didn't propose this is because it's our experience with municipalities that they would much prefer to have something, like the Ion or the shroud mounted on the pole than have this equipment on the side. But it is a possibility.
This is a smaller cabinet that doesn't have the backup power. It's located remote from the pole, as you can tell. They've hidden it behind some type of cover there. But anyway, it gives you an idea of what the size of that cabinet would be sitting beside your pole.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to close and go to comments from the board. And Keith. And just bear with me, we were given 30 minutes for this, and we're sure run long already.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys putting up the mock-ups. I think that was real helpful. I also appreciate the elimination of the kind of more obvious equipment that you had last time on the lights and the freestanding poles. I guess on the proposals we're looking here at today, I would prefer the minimal equipment of just the Ion versus the cabinet, just because it's smaller, and the possibility that someone may or may not down the road want to have more equipment. I think I'd rather have the least amount of equipment initially. I don't know if this is where Gary was headed in his questions, but it seems like it would be nice if the conduits could be minimized, either put closer together so there's fewer visual things running up the pole, if not into a single conduit somehow, or anyway, just to minimize the number of things running up the pole. And if those could be painted to match the pole, I think that would be preferable also. I understand from last hearings discussions about the requirements to have it stand off the pole for the clearances required for personnel and everything. I do think that's kind of unfortunate. It would be nice if there would be some way that the projection in that direction could be minimized, but I think those items could help minimize the visual impact. And looking at the map, kind of happy to see that the locations are spread out to the point where it doesn't look like you'd be, seeing a number of these running down the street, pole after pole after pole kind of thing. They'd be pretty infrequent. So think those are my comments. I think given the overall streetscape, I'm not too worked up about the additional impact given some of the additional equipment or existing equipment that you already have on a lot of these poles, although I would like to see what is added to be, as minimal as possible, as unobtrusive color-wise.
Thanks a lot, Keith. Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate the mock-ups. They do help. I did go and visit them, and there was actually some people in the neighborhood that were looking at it at the same time. And, they weren't real thrilled about the aesthetics of it. And I do think that they're kind of large. And, you're talking about this going on into the future, that the longevity of this could be pretty long. Which brings me to the point that eventually the lines may be underground. So then we're going to have to change this to some cabinet furniture. And I know that the technology is there for underground vaults. I know that there's products for waterproof vaults, and I know that these things are available. And I would much prefer, the antenna doesn't bother me, the conduits are coming up the side of poles all over the place, but the ion unit bothers me. It's off away from the pole, it's 9 feet in the air, there's a potential for more to be added to it, and I think it's an aesthetic burden on the city if we're going to be adding 50 plus of these units. And I would definitely be against this project. The only way that I would be in favor of this project is if they were to underground this equipment, and I know that we have asked cell companies in the past to underground their units. So it's not out of line.
Thank you, Gary. Clay?
And I do have a website of a picture of how they did it.
Mr. Chair. First, I think the mock-ups were helpful. I did actually drive around and look at them, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I also want to thank you for taking the units off of the light standards, because I think that was there's no way I would support this if that was there. Having said that, I did look at each of the installations, and I may share some of the same comments as my colleagues here. One of the things that struck me, though, when I drove around and looked at them was I started looking at other power poles and started to notice the litany of things that exist on different power poles. And I don't usually drive around looking at power poles. And I don't think many other people do either. And it kind of led me to think, well, it kind of looks big and obtrusive, and that's because I'm looking at it. And in a month from now, I'm not even going to notice that it's there. Just like I don't notice that there's a transformer on the pole, and I don't notice that there's cable lines hanging from each house, and et cetera, et cetera. So part of me is feeling like we're looking at something that in a month or two, once it's installed, nobody's ever going to pay attention to anymore, and so what? The other part of me is also looking at it going, well, how do we minimize the impact of it? I'm in favor of minimizing it as much as we can, knowing that eventually it's not going to be something that we're focused on. We happen to be focused on it because it's in front of our board. The other part of this project that kind of is troublesome to me is that it's another one of these citywide projects that the ABR gets to review that doesn't really get to have much power other than maybe not using a shroud or, maybe going to an underground vault, but highly unlikely, right? And we're our hands are tied in the sense that we can make you paint it, we can tell you to take it off the light standards, but this is citywide, which means we're just here to make sure it doesn't look as ugly as it could. So I'm probably going to abstain my vote because I don't have a commitment either way on this project, and I'll just let the board kind of hash it out. I feel like it's unfortunate that we've been sitting here now an hour or so, and we're just rehashing what we talked about last time. So I'm going to pass it on to Carol.
Okay.
Carol?
Thank you. For the past many years, when a cell phone company needs to have their antennas in the city, they have always been put on buildings that are tall enough for their service, and they've been incorporated into the architecture. And a lot has been asked of the applicant in order to conceal it architecturally. So as we are traveling through the city, we're really not aware. Like the Macy's store is a good example. No one really knows that all of those little spirally things are actually cell phone antennas, or whatever the terminology is. So I'm frustrated with this application because this is not concealing anything. We're going in the opposite direction. And as a matter of fact, we're putting it right out there in the visualness of the city. And I don't understand, well, for me, this proposal isn't acceptable because it appears to me that the city is taking a backward stand. And there has been so much asked of previous applicants to spend money and to come up with creative solutions that have really worked in the city that I'm frustrated that more hasn't been asked from like the planning department before you even really get here. I think that this is creating visual clutter in a community that people from all over the world come to Santa Barbara. This is a destination city. This is a world-class city that people come here and they expect and enjoy and support this community as being at a very high level of aesthetics. And this is going in the wrong direction. And I do believe that more should be asked of the applicant to come up with a proposal that minimizes the visual clutter of this application. I'm not opposed to what you're trying to do in the community, but more has to be expected of you, and maybe your clients need to spend more money for the more current technology. But this, to me, is going in the wrong direction. And I was an ABR member like 10 years ago when the first cell phone antennas were being proposed, and immediately the boards took a position, conceal it. And so I can't go backwards at this point. I think you could do something better.
Thanks, Chris.
Once again, a lot of good comments most of which I agree with. I think especially Clay had a good point, his first one about how we're staring at this now, but it will sort of disappear once we are no longer focused on it. But at the same time, I drove around as well and looked at these, and this picture in particular caught my eye because the equipment itself started to it basically stood out quite a bit against the facade of that building, and it was imposing. And so to me, there is still a problem with it being quite bulky, and it is not an attractive piece of equipment. And I guess overall, the other thing I would say is that, everything should be painted brown for the most part, as much as possible, if indeed this is going to pass as is proposed. That would be, as far as minimizing the impact, that's the only thing I can think of, apart from, completely different equipment being used. But I agree with Carol too. I mean, it is visual clutter, and I would certainly entertain another type of equipment being used. That's it.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I'd first like to thank you for the mock-ups. They were very helpful. I think everybody got a good picture of what we were looking at. Thank you for removing the Q-tip type fixture on top of the light poles. That was also a good direction. From what I see here, and again, this is a bit of a reiteration from what I said at the first meeting, and I'll come back. I first want to touch on something that Chris and Clay was saying about the fact that we're looking at it now, and after a little while, we're not going to see it again. I think that, it's there's a lot of people, there's a lot of public that go around looking at things, and they either say, I like what I see, or I don't like what I see. And then you ask them, why do you like what you see? And sometimes they can't tell you. They ask them, why don't you like something? And they say, I can't tell you. It just looks odd to me, but I can't tell you what it is. But the difference is, as the aesthetic board, as the professionals who are in the business of making things look good, we know what's making those things look bad. We know that telephone poles, and you have them all along the street, makes a visual impact on that street. And this city should have been moving years ago towards undergrounding and removing these telephone poles. And where we're going is we're going in the totally wrong direction of not only removing them, but we're adding more and more stuff to these poles. And like Carol said, this is in the view plane that if you're standing 15 feet back and you want to look at the mountains, or you want to look at the facade of a building, that's right in the view plane that you're looking at. So this is actually just putting stuff where we're telling people that we've made a beautiful city and we've done things to make this city look good. We're putting those things right in that, or approving things that are right in that plane that makes those things look bad. And from what I have seen here, I just cannot approve anything that's mounted on these poles in such a large-scale manner. My thinking is that if the poles are already there and we can reduce a system, reduce all the other cell phone towers that we have in town or something like that by having something very minimal on this pole, like a painted out small conduit that runs up the pole and the equipment is undergrounding, well, I think that that's a positive direction. But if you say add things to the pole, which we are already trying to remove the pole, I think it's a totally wrong direction, and I just cannot get there. I just think that the city would be moving in the wrong direction, and we're just adrift without a compass, at least an aesthetic compass. And so, I would strongly feel like this proposal, I would like to deny it, but given what staff has recommended, I could see myself continuing on with it, asking for ultimate minimization of the proposal before I feel that I could contemplate it for review again.
Mr. Chair, I would like to have a straw vote on I believe it's the shroud that we're having most trouble with, right?
The shroud and the ion, is that what it says?
That's below it, yeah.
The two white things that,
right.
Or one white thing per cell phone company.
And we find that unacceptable. I think the applicant has indicated that there's limited choices as far as this equipment. You either put it in a cabinet or in a vault, which is a very expensive endeavor for the entirety of the city. It's not like other wireless facilities where you have one antenna in a large distance that's serving a larger, greater area. These are microcells, so each microcell has its own cabinet, and so I think this applicant needs to be told, the direction you'd prefer.
I'd prefer neither.
Okay.
I personally would not like to see either the ions or the shroud or the connecting box on the pole.
But how about on grade, the cabinetry box?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Can we get a vote on that from the board so we can figure out if that's the entire? We need to give this applicant some direction on if there's a preferred alternative.
Okay. So all those who feel that they can accept the ions and the connection boxes on the pole, and I'll come back and ask about, well, let's start with the biggest item, the shrouds.
I just say equipment on the pole.
Equipment on the poles. All those who feel that they can accept it on the poles, raise their hands, please. We have one. So one board member could accept equipment on the pole, all the others cannot. You need a further. Okay, all those who would accept equipment on the ground, please raise their hands.
You mean, when you say on the ground, you mean cabinet?
Cabinet furniture on the ground. Let the record show that no one raised their hands.
The alternative is a vault at each location, and I don't know if that's going to be feasible for this applicant. You're going to have to speak to that.
I don't know what options are out there, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a proposal right now, but I think it would be useful to get direction along the lines from what you're saying. If that is what the board is focusing on, I think it would be good to have that in the record.
Also, if this applicant chooses to go forward, the discussion at the Planning Commission would be such that this board preferred an underground vault, if that's what your preference is. But you might understand that the Planning Commission has also the final authority.
We understand
to approve whatever proposal.
Yeah, we understand, okay. And we're looking at the aesthetics here. Yeah. So at this point, should we just pass on comments, Jaime?
I think that's the understanding is that the alternative would be not to have anything on the pole.
Correct.
And however they choose to do that would be their option. We propose that. I'm not seeing an alternative proposal to downscale that equipment on the pole.
The ion is the smallest that we can go. But just to get back to this question of the vault, would it be possible to get, for the record, whether or not that is the ABR's definitive preference? Is that where we're headed on this?
I think what you have before you is that there's only one member on the board who feels that any equipment and can be acceptable on the pole, and that is with the knowledge that the minimum amount of equipment that can be on that pole will be a standoff bracket 4 inches, an iron that's mounted on it, and a connection box below it, and possibly a conduit that is 4 inches off the pole traveling up until it hits whatever the little antenna is that sticks up on top. So with that knowledge, we only have one member on the board who feels that they can look at a proposal with that. Everyone else cannot accept it. Yeah.
I just want to add that, along with all the other phone companies in the past, my position is conceal it. And if that means that you have to enter into some kind of agreement with existing buildings to run it up, something that they already have, then that's up to you to explore. And it does sometimes cost more money to do business in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the issue here is that this is a public right-of-way application, and the standard is under the Public Utility Code 7901 and 7901.1, the city has to treat all utilities on an equivalent manner, and unless the city has an ordinance in place that requires that all other users of fiber optic cables, the power company, everybody else, use buildings as an alternative to the right-of-way. It's not something that the city can ask then of just one company to do. So it's I hear what you're saying, and this is a different kind of proposal, but it's an important thing to understand.
Mr. Chair,
so Jaime, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Jaime,
Quickly.
last time we reviewed this, we had asked about undergrounding of utility lines, and that I believe that you had said, and this is why I'm asking, that if the city made an effort to underground all utilities, then this applicant would be required to do the same thing.
That's correct. That's part of the agreement.
Part of the agreement with
Right.
the city.
again, I think the city recognizes, as far as having planning's input, that there's a utopia out there that one day everything will be underground in the city. However, the reality is that these are slow, incremental, very highly expensive endeavors, and so that's why we do it by district. You just saw one up on the Cliff Drive. That it does happen over a considerable amount of years, and so incrementally, that one day the city does plan to underground. But the reality is we are full of overhead structures, overhead utilities, power poles, transformers. A lot of equipment exists in the right-of-way. And so the city's approach is that we would respect these agreements that allow these utilities to install this equipment with some oversight. And this is the oversight tool we have. And so I think at this point, this board would direct this applicant and conclude that at this point, this equipment has not been minimized to your satisfaction. I think that's what I'm hearing. And so the applicant has the right to come back with an alternative or seek a conditional use permit and have that decision elsewhere in another body.
Okay. So what I'll try to do then is I'll try to sum up. And do we have to make a motion or we just make a comment?
You can make a motion.
Okay.
Include your final determination.
Okay. First, I'd like to see if someone would like to make a motion. I'm fine with that. Otherwise, I would try and sum up.
I'd like you to try.
Okay. So I'll try. Give it a shot. Board would like to thank the applicant for coming forward with the information that they have, including the mock-ups and the minimization of their proposed equipment on light fixtures. However, at this time, there's, and I'll put this in brackets, the board cannot accept a proposal that has equipment mounted on the telephone poles at this time, and would prefer to see all equipment undergrounded with very little impact to the existing telephone poles. With that, there is one board member on the board feels that she can look at a proposal that has equipment on the pole. Otherwise, the other board members are not in favor of that proposal. The board welcomes the applicant to return with a revised proposal for review, but would like the applicant to bear in mind the comments and the review comments made here at today's meeting towards any future proposals. Jaime, does that kind of sum it up? So that would be my motion. Do I have a second? Am I allowed to first that? So who can first that for me? Gary, do I have a second? Second by Chris. And under discussion, Keith?
If you could add to that none of the board members find ground-mounted equipment acceptable.
We can add that. None of the board members find ground-mounted equipment acceptable. Okay, so we have a first and a second.
Under discussion, I'd like to add that the reason of your motion is that it increases visual clutter. You didn't really say what the reason that the proposal was unacceptable, and I think it's important to say that it's not consistent with the direction of Santa Barbara, the aesthetics of Santa Barbara.
Well, I think I'd just like to say, we find the proposal greatly adds to the visual impacts upon the community.
Okay, however you want to phrase it, but I think that the reason has to be stated.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I agree, because I think where we're going to end up here potentially is that this goes to another body and whatever our concerns are won't be addressed.
Okay, so I'd like to add that paragraph then. Sorry?
I think it's important if our purview is really about does this proposal minimize the visual impact? that if our motion is that no, it does not, and the board would prefer something than that, at least I think we're doing our job, because I would not be surprised if this ended up at another approval body and our comment, they don't come back here.
Sure. Okay. So I'd like to add the paragraph then that in making our finding, the board finds that the proposal greatly adds to the visual impacts upon the community and does not find that a proposal of this type is moving in a positive direction to minimize visual impacts and increase the aesthetics of the community. Is that full stop? Okay, so we have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Everybody in favor, right? And none opposed? Thanks.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Excuse myself, I have another appointment.
Okay. Thanks, Keith. Okay, we're greatly running behind, and 421 East Coda Street, if we can. Are they here? Are they here? Okay. Hey, Christine.
We've added antennas.
Yeah. We're about an hour behind, so we're kind of antsy right now.
I've got questions.
Yeah, well,
They're just,
but
no major changes, just more information. Yes, that's right.
okay, if you could state your name for the
Christine,
record.
Christine Crone, architect for the project.
Chris Gilliland, landscape architect.
Say that again. Who are you? Okay. Yeah. All right. So we have some minutes. Okay, I'll just quickly go through the minutes, and then I'll have you do your presentation, right? Continued indefinitely to the staff hearing officer. Return to full board with comments. The board finds the project is in compliance with the city charter, municipal code, and consistent with design guidelines. It's compatible with the architectural character of the city and neighborhood, is of an appropriate size, mass, bulk, and scale, is sensitive to adjacent landmarks and historic resources, and does not affect public views, and has an appropriate amount of open space and landscaping. There are no aesthetic impacts to the requested modification for a reduction in parking count and the modification for the reduction in the ground floor patio sizes. The board feels the direction of the architecture is successful, and the board looks forward to further refinements in architecture and landscaping. Show how the storage issues will be addressed at the daycare center for existing activities. Provide shade for the outdoor area of the daycare center. Study the articulation of the daycare center enclosure wall to respond to the concerns regarding mass, bulk, and scale on the street. Study incorporating masonry elements that would relate to the neighborhood context. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
So I'll just quickly quickly, well, I'll just look at these issues that you brought up, and I think we can look at this front 3D rendering to address many of them. Before, on the prior design, had a much larger entry element, addressing number 4 here, that incorporated the decks for these 2 second level units. When we added a shade structure over the outdoor space for the daycare center, we realized on that base we could put, and I'll show you another elevation.
If you, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's just that I'm having a hard time trying to follow when something's going on inside there. Thanks, go ahead.
And I'll show you another elevation. We located the outdoor space for that unit on this side, and then the outdoor space for this unit on this side, making that a much more simple facade and alleviating some of that bulk that was coming out towards the street. We also did go ahead and incorporate sandstone on the low wall as we do across the street, and Arnaldi's does on the corners, so we wanted to keep that same kind of cut of sandstone, and it'll be matching this look right here. And the other concerns was for storage. For the daycare center. And what we did was we grabbed this corner here and made a dual-purpose storage area so that kitty carts could get dragged into this storage area at night, and then they can use it during the day for a lot of the strollers that get left when the children are dropped off. So we kind of got some dual use out of that storage space. This is that covered area loggia to give the children some private sun coverage here, and then we kept this all outside. So that's storage for number 2. That's the shade structure that we're talking about, and what that looks like. Looking from up the street, here's that kind of covered area with the loggia arches, and again the deck above is for the 3rd story units. This has largely stayed the same. This rear elevation, I think we had positive comments about that at the last review. And then so that was storage number 2, shade structure, which you also see here in the loggia arches. One of the comments from our show review, I should say, we did go to show and got our approvals for the modifications, and one of the conditions was to include a commemorative plaque for the Signor family, who was an Italian family who was in this project. So we have located that here at the end of what is the shade structure and the very beginning of the ramp at the front of the Coda Street. So that'll be a ceramic tile recessed arch, and we'll get work more on the design of that. And so shade structure, articulation of the front, we reduced that mass, introduced these, still a little bit of an arch to pick up on the other arches, but made its own identity with little round windows instead of more arches on the front. And I think that's all those issues. Do you want to go back to the site plan briefly? We were able to, one of the concerns was you're trying to move this building back, and we did move it back before. It was about, move it back an additional 2 feet from the street face, providing a significant landscaping pocket here in the corner. That's about, I think, a 3-foot landscaping pocket here, and it's still another 2 feet or so landscaping here. So we really knew that was a big concern, so really massaged this guy to really grab some more landscaping towards the front. We did have to add this ramp up. We had hoped to capitalize on this one here, but in really evaluating the original drawings, unfortunately they showed both of these as being ADA accessible, but the truth is when we looked at that in the field, this one's not. So this is the only complying ramp, so we have to keep that to the use of this building and not double use. But we felt that in spite of having to add that ramp, we still had really achieved a great deal of the added landscaping pockets at the front, carved out more and more out of this courtyard, so this became much more about just pedestrian paths through here, but again, try to open it up as we go internal to provide a few little tables for the office workers right here, kind of tucked back into that space so they aren't right up there at the street. I think that's a lot of the changes from the board's concerns.
I had a quick question, just me personally, a little confused. Was there an interim presentation? You know, after they had that arcade, you had that arcade here? And
Right.
then did you have a previous presentation since then between that one and this one?
Subsequent.
A subsequent?
There's been two prior presentations. One had a long covered arcade here.
Yes.
And then a subsequent one had just a smaller, more square arcade right here. I don't know which arcade you're referring to.
Okay. I think I must have missed one
Yeah.
of these presentations because this
No,
is
you're
like
all
so
here.
new to me.
Everybody was here. Sherry was, Don was.
Was I here?
Uh-uh.
I was
Seven.
at the second one, right?
Right.
Yeah, I only remember the long loggia.
And there's 7 of us or 8? 7?
6.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 of us then.
I think that's right.
Right. So I was probably missing 2.
No,
No?
I remember you being there.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Gary
It's just,
was gone. Gary says he was gone for the second one as well.
okay. It just looks so new to me. I just there's a lot of it I don't recognize. So I'm just curious as to.
No, it had a larger front here. Do we have the?
You have the previous proposal, Misha.
If I need to present, it hasn't changed much. Right, landscape. Okay. I don't think there's too much to add to the landscape. The concept remains the same. The planters have been rearranged for the most part. There are still the seating areas. All the same seating areas are there, just relocated. There's a seating area here, a couple benches sort of placed throughout, a lot of potted plants in specific areas where they do fit. As Chris said, this little seating area here, and especially here at the front, it's really been greened up quite a bit. There's quite a bit more planter space there. Other than that, the daycare courtyard area was rearranged, and so the landscape followed, and everything else remains as it was
Yeah, I think.
in the previous presentation.
Yeah, we were obviously carried on towards the staff hearing officer, and it sounded like we were definitely on track for and expecting a preliminary approval with having to address some of those issues.
So was that the previous one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was on 7/13.
7/13.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yep.
Carry on.
And otherwise, it's, two-piece red mission tile, smooth trowel plaster. It'll be a bronze anodized aluminum windows with a beveled stop to give them that nice look. The sandstone veneer, we'll use a real sandstone on that.
Okay. Okay.
Is that it? For
That's
your
it?
presentation?
Okay.
I
You
feel like we
have
should go back.
just to check a few things. You have a screen check valve, backflow.
We've located it, and Chris has lots of landscaping there to hide it. That's a really big planter, and it's located in that. We believe we'll be able to significantly mask it there. Are you finished your presentation? Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment?
Mr. Chair, there's one letter of opposition from Ms. Paula Westbury.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Bring it back to the board then.
And that
That's
was
it.
here.
That's your check valve. Okay.
No questions for me, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Gary?
Chris, did you eliminate the little spiral thing there?
No.
Oh,
isn't it?
It's still there.
No, I have no questions.
Carol?
No questions.
Clay? Okay. Comments? Gary?
Sure, I'll make a few.
From what the last one is to this one, I think that this building has become very stark, and that I like the little add of the little roof element, but I do miss the arches in the arcade, and I'm really not in favor of the round porthole windows. The other thing is that I still feel like the entry is so hard to get to, and I think we had some discussion about that. And, I think part of the discussion was that we had this entryway here, and it's not readily accessible. And I know that we have some flood control problems, some height limitations.
And program constraints that the client has.
And one of the other things that I'm noticing on this one is the little arcade way. I enjoyed it on this version over here with the shed roof, and I feel like that with this porthole and the balustrade that we added, we're headed more towards the Spandeco model. I would say just the squareness of the post, the sharpness of the architecture at that balustrade, and the same thing with underneath the sills. Although I enjoy the sills on the other one, I feel like the geometry of the sills that you have on the building are still a little too deco looking for me. And the other thing I'd like to see is I'm enjoying the sandstone. However, where there are elements where the sandstone is open, I would think that we would want to have some sort of capital or something that points that there's an opening there. It's real linear. And maybe if there's small little capitals or sandstone capitals or something that they would have done in those days would be added at that point. That's my comment.
Okay. Dawn?
Yeah, and I apologize I wasn't here last time. But Christine, I also think that the previous proposal, which I didn't see, has some cohesion that the subsequent one doesn't have. And to me, the building is having a little bit of an identity crisis. Gary picked up on the deco detailing, and then if you go back, since I'm going to point to the camera.
Let's point to the camera. You want this one? Or?
This is fine.
Yeah.
The deco here, and then the round windows, and then this detailing, and then back there the scallop detail, and there's just so much going on that I would prefer a little bit more cohesion. I also have some issues with the proportion of this element, and I'm not sure what it is about it that is not working for me, but I don't think it works. This little tiny pop out with a little hip roof, and just it looks so short and stubby, and these windows look so low, being below the arch, and a lot of mass up here. It's not working for me. It's not that I have a problem with the building in and of itself as far as the mass bulk and scale. I still stand by my first review that that's not the problem. I think that it could be nice if the windows were all recessed.
It's recessed like a foot.
Okay, the drawing isn't making it show like the windows are recessed a foot, but the proportion of this element, the big, little, medium, and then all these kinds of windows, and then this sill detail, the round windows, and that little detail, there's something that's not, it's just...
Just looking to see if there's more elevations for you to look at.
That's what's not working.
Yeah. I'm not finding it.
For me, and I agree with Gary about the not being able to go in at the entry. And if you look at the floor plan, I know you're saying that you have program requirements, and this is the first time I'm looking at it, so I can't, I can't speak to, hold on a second,
Yeah, let's just.
the fact that you're saying you have problems and the program requirements are keeping you from pushing this entryway back, but it's a huge reception, and then this is all, this is circulation.
It's program space that the client wants about how they control. They have very young children dropped off. That this is a dual stage drop-off space with reception to what will be little flex walls that are 3.5 feet high. That have a second lobby. It was all program driven. How this is designed.
I think what we should do is adjust.
It's not
you address
working.
the architecture. Let's address the architecture,
I wish that there was an
we worry
opening
about
here
the program.
To the door. That would be the traditional way of doing the door.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the other little issues that I'm sure you can resolve. They're just, to me, they're all minor. But if we're looking at giving this a preliminary approval, I look at the front elevation, and for me, there's just not enough cohesion there. I know it's minor, but it's also a big deal to make sure that everything's right before we give it preliminary.
Thanks, Don. You want to look at the other elevations?
I did.
You did?
I did. I don't have any major issues with them.
Okay.
I think that the upper level balcony being enclosed on one of the sides and incorporating it into the hip roof is maybe, it's not a deal breaker for me.
Okay.
The thing that I'm not liking is the front, mainly.
Okay. Clay?
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I'm just going to agree with what's been said. The biggest point I've had on this project from day one has been that the main entry of this building goes into some place where you don't want everybody going. And program aside, there's always more than one way to skin the cat when it comes to these things. I really like that we've been able to push the building back. I look at the front facade, and it looks like almost like a quintessential 1930s, 1940s apartment building in LA. And there's a lot of examples you can look for that. But the porthole windows and some of the Spandeco styling that Gary coined seems to take it away from what it could be. I've also noticed that the windows on the front elevation, it's little things like these don't stack exactly.
They got fixed. These do now. It was 6 inches off. It got fixed.
I think it's not quite there. This entryway here is. If I told somebody I lived here, they would all come to that door unless they've been here before. And I think that there's. I just think that there's so many ways to do this that with a little tweaking it could really push in the right direction. The other elevations, I love the back. That still, to me, seems to be the best part of the building. Unfortunately, nobody gets to see that except for the tenants. And I think that this end over here has gotten successful. I think a little study on that side will really dial it in, but it's much better than it was before. I definitely think the project's moving in the right direction. I just feel like some of these details like this and this and this that Dawn's mentioned, they're just not working. But the biggest overriding thing that I've had the biggest problem with on this project is that entryway. It's almost, I know daycare design. I'm working on one. I've done a couple of these things, and I know that there's issues that you have with drop-off and security and keeping people sequestered in a way, and how you get the kids through from one side to the other side and out to the play yards and back, and I know those issues. To me, it's still, in my mind, it's still not there, and the entry point being the prominent spot along that street, even more so than this building, the next door building. We're definitely announcing the entry point, and I think it's just not there yet. It just needs to be studied.
Thanks, Clay. Carol.
Actually, I just need a clarification. Can I just grab your pen just so my finger's longer? So you have hardscape going all the way up to the wall, and then the wall drops down, and then we have sidewalk. What prevents the children or the wheelchair or anything from just sort of sliding over this?
It'll just be a handrail. It's under 30 inches, so.
So there's a handrail on top of this.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be a guardrail, not the 4-inch on center picket. It's just a handrail.
Okay, so the handrail will come up here and extend out over there. My comment is this: there's something uncomfortable to me feeling if I was in a wheelchair. You know, you make the turn, you're coming up, and I'm just so close. You know, even though the handrail is there, I'm thinking, okay, so the wall is just block, 8-inch block, plastered.
Well, it's sandstone clad block, and it's sticking up. You know, taller. You know, at the beginning, it's sticking up by 2 feet above that point, 2.5 feet, and once you get over here, it's sticking up about 6 inches curved, and it'll have a continuous handrail guard on it.
Right. So for the requirement, the wheelchair will come here and then it go into the residential. That's what this is for.
It's for the access into the daycare center.
Okay. So then my question. Let me just clarify something. So do you need? Could the landscaping then be extended over? Because it seems to me at this point we have our dimension. If this is the requirement, is it possible to get more landscaping along here?
A little bit, and we looked at it. It was just a symmetry thing.
It's a symmetry thing.
This is required. You have to open this up 5 feet from the 4 feet line, so that's required to about there.
Right.
So there was a possibility to grab it a little bit.
I think at this point we don't. It may take more than small measures to correct it. So we have to be careful that we're not
micro commenting.
Offering small measures to fix a bigger problem.
Okay.
Which you may not be happy with when you come
Well,
back.
I'm just trying to find solutions to celebrate this as an entry to something. And so in my mind, Chris, where I was sort of thinking is there a possibility of getting 2 larger specimens, since this dimension isn't enough for anything? You know, could we offset it and get 2 tall palm trees or something just to say this is the entrance? So I was trying to just see what is the possibility of.
I think there are pygmy dates on either side of that. Pygmy date
Yeah,
palms.
but I'm thinking something different, you know. Okay, well.
It needs a strong identity, that's what.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and just to throw my 2 cents into these round windows, I actually did think it was more sophisticated looking with not the round circle, you know, not the round windows. And if there's a design decision that was made to add those, you know, I'd either like to hear it or we'll pass on that. But I thought the square and the rectangular windows were just more sophisticated looking.
Thanks, Carol. I'm having trouble with this also in that I think the reason why it struck me as being like if there was another presentation that I did not see is that I remember the old one and I remember our comments and, you know, looking forward to the revisions coming from that and I feel a little bit like Dawn. I feel like the building is losing its identity. It needs an identity, and it's losing it. I feel that this entrance really is not working well at all. I think these cuts, and they're virtually just like slices in the wall, where these are the main entrances to the building, or supposed to be, and that's the one that has the visual entrance. I just feel they don't work at all. This is so flat on this face, and the little roof over that is almost just a tokenism. And what you really see is this big rectangular box with a long roof. I think it's just, it really needs some massaging. And what the other, while the other one did not work perfectly, what it did was it took this great big mass of the box and it had these carve-outs on top. So it had these voids in it that was starting to break it down into smaller pieces. And I think that was a way it was working quite well. But here, I mean, this little bit here is emphasized when I look at this image that you have here, and I look along the streetscape and I look at the face of that building, and especially with this little one and this little wall, and it's all in that plane. Maybe it's a couple of inches difference here, but with that long mass, I just feel that this is not working. The scale is not working. It lacks a human scale. I think it's larger than a human scale, and everything feels very, very compressed up onto the street. I feel that this plane here is so short. I think it needs a little direction somehow. I agree with Gary that these members out here this is I don't find that these really suit the style of architecture in the square formations. This to me, I thought this would get massaged some more. I think that the planning for this was working well, but the straight shoot up here, there are no landings here, or just go straight up? Is there a landing?
Just like before, and had positive comments on it before.
The massaging of it to go beyond the last one, I think it's just not gone far enough. I mean, the shed roof off of this also that modulates this vertical element with a cap up there, I think is just not thought out well enough also. I mean, I'd really like to see this become a little bit softer. I agree with the others on the wrong circular elements. And I don't know, it could be that your program that you have inside is a drawback to being able to produce an entrance that can take this building in a better direction. So, I mean, I think that you should look at your programming and see if there's something that can be done. But if the programming is causing this, then I think that's where you have to go to look to try and make a solution before you try to make these two planes work like that where they're so tight. In the back, I think that the back is fine. I like, again, the smaller units, the carving out of these areas, and it's a very simple kind of look. I think, that's working quite well. What I would have liked to have seen here is a little bit more celebration of this plane, which actually takes the two planes and it separates them by showing that there is an accessible element that goes up here. But this just seems so plain to me that it doesn't have enough depth, or it doesn't, in the way it's articulated with just the plaster wall, it's just not strong enough to really to help that. And again, this was where it's a great step to do that, and then I was looking for the massaging of that again, and it's just not further massaged. So it's just the little things for me. I mean, well, it's not only the little things. I have to say that what is taking place with the front facade, with this big rectangular box, and this kind of a plant-on entry there, I think it's a direction it's not going in the right direction, and it's kind of not following on what you have in the back in terms of scale and proportion. So I'm having a difficult time with it. That's where I am.
Well, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
One of the comments was trying to get a lot more landscaping towards the front. To do that, we had to push this building back and slenderize it. Not have this stick out so far. So in order to respond to
a bunch of concerns from the last review, we do so. Do I have support then to push back to the street from the board? Because what we're looking at,
I think the answer is not an A or B from us. The answer is not that we kind of have to explain what the problem is.
We're also up against the number of children we can accommodate here, so that's
I know. And you know, we'd love you to be able to double the number of kids that you could have there also. It's just that, you know, we also have charged with making it look right, or at least acceptable. And I think the answer is not that, okay, you know, increase the landscaping. So because you increase the landscaping, you have to do something to the architecture that's negative. I don't see that as being a trade-off at all. I don't think that's an acceptable trade-off. You know, you have to be able to make the architecture work and the landscaping work.
This is if I can go, the forms you're looking at here, these are kind of classic, simple 1920s vernacular, where you would have a very simple form and a very simple articulation of the front. And I can show you many instances of these all over town that are classic buildings.
We're saying the same thing. It's just, it's not quite there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hearing something that's like some detail issues that are easy to fix, but I'm also hearing some major surgery issues people are bringing up about having to have this deeply recessed or carving out huge sections. And that's
I didn't say that in particular. I just said that it...
Well,
I've
said from day one on this project that the front door of this project is right here.
That's what we're trying to say, though. That's been our program. This is the front door to this daycare center that we want to clearly designate. This is the entry court to what are private residences.
It's an extremely vulnerable population living in the back. You know, this is supportive, on-site, fully supportive housing. These special needs people. We don't want it to appear to be that accessible to anybody who's walking down the street.
So this has always been a program issue for us. We're purposefully doing this. And adding stairs here, you know, it pushes this back. In order to get all the clearances that are required, this gets pushed in. That's why there's no stairs there. Also, just to be, you know, for fair access.
Yeah.
If it helps, to me, the biggest issue is not the fact that there's not stairs right there. To me, there's the other things, the proportion of that entry, the fact that it's only 2 feet stuck to the outside, the windows not quite right, the detailing of the windows. It's just, for me, it's those things. The fact that that element is, to me, a little too wide, and then the roof isn't quite right. Those are the things that, if it helps, are more of the issues for me. And I see closets. I see that you're saying, yeah, you need a reception, and then you need a certain amount of room, but does the program dictate that you need exactly 10 feet for the second reception, and then exactly 2 feet of closet behind that? I mean, it's hard for me to...
It's about visibility across those two spaces.
No, I'm looking at when you get inside, you're telling us that you can't do anything to the program. And then I look into the floor plan and I see closets.
They
right
need
there.
Storage. I mean, that's...
yeah, but they have to be right there. That's right where you're saying, you pushed every dimension to its limit, and you push the building as far back as you can, and then right behind it, you have closets. So I don't want to get into the floor plan. It's none of my business, but I'm not buying it. That there's nothing you can do to the program.
But it's not just one element here. I think that there's a combination of things working together that they're not successful. I mean, as an entrance to a complex, this slip in this long wall like this, a sharp entry like that, as Gary pointed out, I mean, this is not a celebrated walkway into this paseo at all. If this is meant to be a paseo, and then that's meant to be an entrance, and even though you're supposed to be able to go there, that, you know, it's just not reading that way. You know, it needs more subtlety. It needs more sensitive little things that are happening to make this work. And that's a difficult problem where you have an entrance to the building, but you really don't want people to come up there. Yeah, that is a problem. But the answer is not just to say that we can't have steps there. You have to create an architectural solution that makes it acceptable. And I don't have the answer for it, but this one is working. I mean, I could see clearly right away that it's not working. And so if you know, that's the problem. I mean, I wish I could tell you, you know, do this and that would work, but you know. So I think we have some work to do.
I don't think it means you just called it major surgery. I don't think it's major surgery, Christine. I think it's, you know, mainly this area with something's not quite working there. I think the window thing is a minor issue. I mean, the building and the mass broken scale is fine. It's just if you look at this, just let me belabor this a little bit more than we already have. But if you look at the floor plan and you look at this arcade, is it part of the requirement that the arcade has to be right in the middle and it has to jog here, and you can't do a walkway straight across, and you can't take this open space in the back and move it up front? And
well, then yeah, I mean, then I lose the 15 by 15 that's required, that can't be covered, which is right here. I have 8 inches, I can get there.
But this is what I was saying before.
This is
these
a minimum.
Closets, you know, these closets are taking up valuable. I mean, if you're saying you
I just don't know
absolutely
that
have to have 12.
a deep recess here is a solution. If you're saying pocket,
No, I'm not saying
hole
anything.
into the street face is.
We're not trying
not
to say
saying
what
that.
the answer is. We're just saying that what's here right now, the things that we see are not working. You know, that's you know, don't put us in the position of trying to solve it successfully, because that's not our job. You know, it will be too tough for us to do it. I mean, you're living with it all the time, and we just get to see it for a few minutes, and you know, you're saying, well, you know, we can't do this because of that, and you're looking to us for a solution. But you know, it's too tough for us. You know, if I could find a solution right off, I will. But
I don't think we're asking you to give us a solution, but I think Christine is sensitive to what the programmatic needs are and what our funding needs are. You know,
Yeah.
we don't have a limitless amount of money to throw at the architecture.
Understandable.
So we want to make
Yeah.
sure that we understand what you're saying when you ask for changes, and I think that's the clarification. She doesn't want you to solve it, but just what I'm hearing is it doesn't work, but I'm not sure there's the clarity of exactly why it doesn't.
Well, we've been really clear. I think I've said the same thing like 3 times now. I don't know if I could say it any different way. So.
Well, that's what.
you know, it's very plain. The front elevation is very plain. It's very flat. It lacks nuances to it. I don't think the solution need be expensive. I don't think we're talking about money at all. I'm not saying that, hey, this thing needs to spend more money to make it look good. I don't see that at all. I just see that it's the way it's coming across now, and the way the masses are put together. The building is way too flat. You know, the entrance looks like it's just stuck on there to the front. It looks very slim. The way the entrance reads from the public side and the entrances to the whole project, these are not commensurate with the paseo that you're trying to create. It's those kind of things we're trying to say. And I don't know where to go from there. You know, it's just... I mean, the whole programming that you have, at least for the site layout, as we said before, at least when I was here at the last meeting, works well. I can't talk about what's happening in here. I don't know what's happening in here. But what I saw in the previous proposal, I thought that there were elements of that, my feeling that there were elements of that was more successful than this one. And I gave some reasons as why it was successful, because it helped break down the long mass. You know, it had that void on top. I'm not saying go back to that. I'm just saying it had a more successful element, and that needed work also. And I think that this direction that we've gone from that to this is not positive from that one then. So don't get me wrong. I'm not just saying that this building needs to be any more expensive. it could be a very simple solution, but I'm not sure what it is. And I'd love to be able to find it for you.
Mr. Chair, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please, Clay. Anything could help.
So I've been probably the loudest voice when it comes to this part of the project since day one, because I've always felt like every scheme we've seen thus far has made this a major entry point, or at least it's on the circulation path. It's very visible architecturally. It's pronounced in all the elevations ever since then. And I've always felt personally that you don't want the general public coming to this project as a whole, because I think this actually stands out more than any entry point along this building as well. So I'm looking at the street elevation going, this is the most prominent spot that everybody's going to go to, and this is the spot that needs to be secured. It needs to be monitored.
Yeah, hence the reception area.
And it needs to be, exactly, yeah, that's why you have a double entry here. And you have a director's office and all that kind of stuff right in front, so that can be monitored at all times. That's why this is here. Now, programmatically, this program has to exist in this project. My question is, programmatically, does this program have to exist in this one and only spot? Because what I'm seeing is we have an entry court here that tucks back around, and I don't see any reason programmatically, unless you tell me otherwise, that a reception area and director's office couldn't be located here, and then the rest of this
Obviously, we discussed that.
could be
Yeah, this
opened up.
This area is a sleeping area, so we don't want kids coming, parents doing pickups in the middle of the
Nap
room,
time.
bed, right? And this, because the outdoor area is here, this area has to be the activity area, kitchen, feeding area, and that type of a thing. So by having this in the middle, it allows us a separation, noise-wise, of space and transparency between both the sleeping and the activity area, so that the kids can be seen at all times, no matter where the teachers are in the structure.
And the younger kids versus the older kids.
And the sleeping area has to be open to everything. It can't be partitioned off.
Well,
Limitedly, it can.
Not really. I mean, I think if you were having...
It has to be in sight.
Yeah, inside, but couldn't there be French doors leading to the sleeping area? In this area, it could still remain quiet. You could still go in and out this way, and the door to the sleeping area goes that. I mean, we're getting into kind of not our purview, but I think that
we're trying to maximize the number. We've gotten a lot of pressure from City Council to maximize the number of low-income infants that we serve, because there's such a dire need. And so we're designing this, trying to fit in 25 babies. And as you know, Clay, if you've been working on these, there's requirements for activity space square footage that allows for that. So I think we tried to use the administrative space and the storage space that we thought that we would need a minimal amount of that, and doing it in the center works that way the best. If there's any corridor or anything like that, it's going to take away space from the activity space that we need to include 25 kids. And clearly on the site, there's no way to make the building expand in any other direction.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I just,
Sarah, wrap this up.
yeah. Is there any possibility, can I just grab your,
Is that mine or yours?
this is mine. Can I just grab your pen for a second? It seems to me that since this relief seems to be a concern, the shallowness of it, if the building front was lined up with the ramp.
There's ADA issues with that.
You, really?
Yes. The ramp has to widen out to 5 feet above the...
you need a landing.
Yeah.
So between that wall and the
Okay, so is there any reason why all of this couldn't be landscaped? I mean, why are we, why?
This has to be 1 foot more here.
For the chair?
And these doors have to swing out, Christine.
No, they don't.
They don't?
No.
Even with your occupancy over 49?
No, they don't.
All right, so
Split in
you
half.
can't push this any further than what it is for the chair requirement. You can't get this facade out, reduce this, but you can't get this out any further?
No.
No. You know what I mean? No.
Yeah, I mean,
You don't have 1 foot or 6 inches or anything back here to where you could push this back and push all this back a little bit more. Because
Well,
you
as-
have to have 22 feet there, exactly 22 feet. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. It just seems hard that you've got 4 feet for a hallway here, but you can't find 6 inches to make this little
4
hallway.
feet,
3
as
and a
you
half.
know, these are all requirements.
Okay.
These are tough,
All right.
tough units. Every box shows you the swings and the required widths of the hallways for the door strikes and the required
Yeah,
clearances.
I think what we need is then
We're trying
you
really
may
hard
have to
to
find another architectural solution to make that work. If you can't find space in there, you have to find another architectural solution that would make it work on the front of the building. That's really the problem.
I accidentally turned yours on, sorry.
Yeah, and so, you know, I'd like to just say that stretch that out, but actually I don't think that that's the solution. I think that there's more to it than that, and I think it needs some thinking as to how that can work. And I don't think that there's just one solution to this. There's definitely more than one solution, and sometimes out of a problem can come a really great design. Anyway, that's my comments. I open for a motion on the board.
Can I ask one question of Gary?
Yes.
In your description of it, it sounded like you wanted to, for safety reasons and otherwise, de-emphasize that as the main entryway to the building? Yeah. I'm sorry. Gary
Clay.
said, why isn't she looking at me? Sorry about that.
Maybe it's because I took my name tag
Yeah.
prematurely. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Well, you had brought up the issues of security and this being
Microphone.
the focal point of the entrance to the building as a concern to you, and I wanted to make sure that I'm not hearing two different things because it seems everyone else is saying that it needs more emphasis.
And it's also not an aesthetic consideration.
Just to break in here, personally, I don't think that you can make a central element of the building without making it look like it's the entry, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You can make an architectural center of this building that could give it a centering effect, and it doesn't have to look like an entry.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just things that you can do
Okay,
that, without it looking like these are the two big grand doors of the whole building,
Right.
which tells you that's where you're supposed to go, and that's where the entrance is on top.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's other ways to do it, and
Yeah, I think Chris kind of answered your question for me, but
Okay.
yeah.
so anyone can want to take an attempt, clear. Gary? Mm-mm. Don? Okay, I'll take a stab at it, and you guys help me out here, okay? The board feels that so this would be continued indefinitely to full board with the following comments. The board feels that this presented iteration of the project is adding to the starkness of the Coda Street elevation. And there are a number of items that the board would like to see addressed. One, the entry area to the main paseo needs to be more celebrated. Study the contradiction in the central element of the architecture which connotes the main entry, but the desire is not to have people enter at that point.
Just your daycare entry. I mean, we want to.
There's a lot more people coming in there than the apartments.
That want to know that this is the entry. People who don't know. I mean, people know where they live.
Then make it an
to put that part in there, Kathy, about not wanting it to be the main entry.
Okay, then make it the main
Proportion.
entry.
I think
Okay.
the proportion of that is
Yeah.
what I heard up there. I'm helping you out.
Well, the central element, which includes the entry of the building and its flatness to the main facade, is not helping to break down the mass of the overall building. The circular window forms study the circular window forms for compatibility with the building style. Study the plant-on plaster sills at the windows for compatibility with the style also. Study the shed roof element at the upper level porch above the main paseo entry facing the southeast. I'm going to say this. I think I'm going to say, correct me if you guys don't agree with this. The board would like to see an element in the building that breaks down the overall Quarter Street mass of the building.
I don't necessarily feel that way.
No?
I feel that and that's an under discussion item,
Okay,
actually. But
it would
I'm
be
gonna
under
say
discussion,
now.
right.
I don't know if that is where I'm going
Okay.
with this.
I said the board would like to see
Something
a
that breaks
central
down.
element that breaks down the scale of the building.
Oh, a central element that
A
breaks it down.
central element to the building that breaks down the,
Okay.
the overall scale of the building.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And the board would like to see subtle massaging of the elements of the building, like the staircase stepping, the parapet walls, that would enhance the character of the architecture. Full stop. Okay. So, having said that, do I have a maker? Or does anybody want to amend it and make it?
Did you mention anything about the balustrade or that upper porch area?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to. So,
I thought you mentioned
here?
I didn't hear you mention
Yeah.
No, I didn't
you
mention
did.
it. But now that you have mentioned it,
I'll make the motion. We need a seconder before we under
so
discussion.
we have Dawn as a first,
I'll second.
Gary second. Under discussion. Can I add that?
Yeah, can we add a comment, Kathy, that says study the detailing of the upper level east-facing apartments balcony? Was there anything mentioned about the proportion and the placement of the windows on the south-facing elevation?
South facing.
This is south.
Oh, no, we didn't, but I think that's a good idea.
I think that just study the placement and proportion and sizes of all of the windows on the south elevation. Just study it, Christine, to make sure. I'm just looking at, you probably have a reason, I don't want to get into it, why these are so small. They're just really small windows. They just seem to be really small to me. And there's so many different kinds of windows in placement, and some of them aren't quite lining up. I know you said you resolved that, but I'll just put that in there.
Okay, so if there's any more under discussion? Carol?
I already put away my Mac. Part of your motion, what did you say about this area? What was your concern?
I just thought that the architecture just needed further refinements here. It seems a bit raw to me. I mean, this was a few iterations back, and yes, the programming is correct, but it lacked massaging. It just...
Yeah, it did seem like the last time there was a lot more charm in that area. Okay, I just needed to understand.
Likewise, the west elevation steps.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not, we gave direction to the applicant last time, and I just want to make sure that we're not deviating, that we're not revisiting some issues that had already been approved. So if you could just, just take a look and just make sure we're not going backwards with our direction and what has already been resolved in the past.
Well, the board feels that the direction of the architecture was successful and that the board looks forward to further refinements in architecture and landscaping. And these are the refinements we're looking at, and we're commenting on the refinements. Okay, any further items under discussion for that? No? So all those in favor of the motion as read, say aye. Aye. Against? Motion carries. Did I hear a murmur over there, Clay? Yes, and with that comes the end of the meeting. Thank you, and good night, Santa Barbara.
It's a fake.